My guest is Cody Campbell. He's the co-CEO of Double Eagle Energy. He's a former Texas Tech Red Raider. He's on the Texas Tech Board of Regents as the chairman. He's leading the Saving College Sports Initiative. This initiative is a 501c4 organization dedicated to fighting for a college sports system that protects both student athletes and the future of college athletics at every level. Cody, thanks for joining me on Sports Business Radio. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
First of all, I applaud your passion for college athletics, both at Texas Tech and just in general. Give me a sense of how you started this Saving College Sports initiative.
Well, I was appointed to the Board of Regents at Texas Tech about 5 years ago, in 2021, a little over 5 years ago. And this was just before Oklahoma and Texas announced that they were leaving the Big 12. And so when that occurred, it took everyone by surprise. And so Texas Tech kind of undertook an initiative to figure out what's going on. How do we best position ourselves to not get left behind, to make sure that we preserve athletics and the visibility of our university through athletics. And so we started work on researching and understanding, what drove that move. What's the underlying legal situation, governance situation, and what are the causes and solutions for the problems that are occurring in college athletics. And so at first it was entirely through the lens of just, how do we make sure that Texas Tech is best positioned. But through that, I learned a lot about the system and saw a lot of broader problems. I also saw a lot of potentially broad solutions. And so, once we'd gotten Tech into a pretty good spot, and you've seen sort of the moves that we've made there and the things that we've done to elevate the athletics programs at Texas Tech. Once we got there, and even in conjunction with that, started doing research, worked with a couple of think tanks in Texas to dig deeper and, come up with good public policy to resolve the issues that we were facing. And what became apparent is that the only way to solve the problems is through federal legislation, unfortunately. We've tried it through, changing NCAA rules. We've tried it through reorganizing conferences, the CSC, the College Football Playoff, kind of you name it, we've tried to do it. State laws, of course, have been passed, and all of it has resulted in just more chaos. There's been no stabilization of the system. Sports continue to be cut, opportunities continue to be lost, budget deficits continue to grow. And so the only thing we're left with then was, all right, let's figure out what the best federal policy is for college sports. And so we sort of came up with a plan and, an outline of what needs to be done. And, over time, developed that from what the best possible outcome is, just practically speaking to solve the problem, but then what is politically possible, what can actually pass, because there are a lot of different, ideas, and there's a whole spectrum of views. Some of these things touch on ideological nerves that we want to avoid. We want to make something that's bipartisan that, everyone can agree on. And so started working on that. And I got involved working directly with the Trump administration during the transition period and helping them on their policy on this front, and worked informally for quite a while. Then got appointed to the president's Council on Sports Fitness and Nutrition, and they put me on this topic. And then was more recently made co-chair of the President's Roundtable on College Sports with Raimi Levine, the president of the Yankees. And so, most recently, Raimi and I have been working pretty hard on, trying to bring all the senators, the relevant ones, together and, come up with a bill that works. And so, spent a lot of time with Senators Cruz and Cantwell. They are the two key players in the Senate because they are the chair and the ranking Democrat member of that committee. And, and then meanwhile, working with the House and trying to figure out something that can work there. But unfortunately, the bill that's been produced in the House has failed get to the floor 3 times. And so pathway now that seems to be the only one left is through the Senate. And I'm very encouraged that, last week we had bill language released, and I was super pleased with it. I mean, it's an extensive bill. It's 111 pages. It's comprehensive. It's not perfect, but it does touch on everything that needs to be touched on, and it resolves a lot of the problems that have been plaguing college sports and causing these, the chaos and the problems and the disorder, and is a great step toward resolving the long-term issues that college sports have.
So it's the Protect College Sports Act that you referred to. And I mean, Cody, again, I commend you because this is like a hornet's nest to try and get into. And especially when you mix politics into it, like you've had to go to DC and you're a great business person. This isn't just business. This is politics too. So there's a lot of layers to this. But one of the things that you've talked about is the 1961 Sports Broadcasting Act and amending that, which would free up billions of dollars for these secondary sports. So as everyone knows, college football, college basketball, they are the revenue drivers on every campus. But a lot of athletic departments are running at deficits, and they're trying to figure out, how do we pay for tennis and baseball and softball and lacrosse and water polo? So how could that act being amended help those secondary sports potentially?
Yeah, so explaining the challenge a little bit, we don't even have the numbers for 2025 yet. In 2025 was the first year where the athletic departments directly paid the athletes. And the salary cap, as stipulated in the House, the NCAA settlement was $20.5 million. So that was an added expense to the athletic departments in 2025. But even in 2024, before that new expense, the average budget deficit for an FBS athletic department, so the biggest athletic departments, was over $20 million per school per year. And so that's not a sustainable situation. And so what schools were having to decide is like, all right, where does this money come from? Like, some of them can lean on donors, and that's fine. That's good. But for most of them, it is diverting revenue away from the academic mission, whether it's through student fees or through using taxpayer dollars or tuition dollars or whatever to fund the athletic department. Now, there's a business case for doing that because athletics do drive alumni engagement, applications, enrollment, and visibility of the school, value of the degree, those types of things. So, athletics do provide a value to the university. So it's not a complete waste. But at a certain point, when you get to where we probably are now, which is the 40, 50 plus $1 million per year deficit range, that becomes unsustainable for many athletic departments. And so these boards have to, sit down and make really tough decisions. Do we remain competitive in the only sport that makes money, which is football? Also the only sport that provides meaningful exposure to the school. It's the one that can be directly related to application numbers and alumni engagement, whereas the other sports really can't. So we have to maintain our competitiveness there, which means we have to find a place to get the money to pay for it. Well, that means that, absent, some kind of, found pot of money somewhere in the university, which doesn't exist, we have to start cutting these other sports that lose money. And so those sports are the Olympic sports and women's sports. And so you've started to see that all over the place. I mean, the most surprising one was a couple of weeks ago when Arkansas cut tennis.
Right.
And you think, all right, Arkansas is in the SEC, they're doing just fine, but that's not the case. You dig in deep and you look at the numbers behind, they were publicly reported numbers, and they're the real numbers. And, I've been fortunate enough to see a lot of the real numbers, and they're ugly. And they're ugly from the G6 all the way up to the Big Ten and SEC. People are running massive deficits, and they're not sustainable. So, so that's a problem that has to be solved. And so we've explored a lot of different opportunities to, control cost. I think that's important, because there is a lot of waste in the system, and nobody can deny that. But then also increase revenue, because college sports has done a very poor job of monetizing itself, right? So, just TV rights alone, college football has twice as many viewers as the NBA, but college football makes half as much revenue off of their media rights as the NBA. So something is not right there. But then you dive even deeper and you just look at generally how things are managed. And, there are a lot of different sources of revenue for athletic departments, and very few of them do a very good job of fully capitalizing on on their revenue opportunities. They're just not built to be commercial. They're built to be these amateur enterprises. And that's just a legacy of where they came from. And, everybody has to change with the times, including college athletics. So we have to start thinking about it more as a business than as just this purely amateur, enterprise. And the reason we have to think about it as a business is not to make a profit. It's actually to maintain the nonprofit status, but to fund the Olympic and women's sports. Football, for most places, is going to survive because it does make money. But also in most places, cuts are going to have to be made in order to keep football intact. And so that's a huge loss to the universities, a huge loss to our Olympic development system. But the thing that is most important to me, and the reason that I've made a passion project out of this, is that cutting those sports is really hurtful to those kids that participate in them. Because I firmly believe that the opportunity for a kid to receive a scholarship to be on the track team at the University of Wyoming is just as life-changing as the kid that gets a scholarship to play football at University of Georgia. And, it's opportunity to education, it's opportunity to social mobility, it's character development, it's work ethic development, it's learning how to deal with adversity. Everything that, has made me what I am, and helped me to be successful in business in my personal life. Many of those lessons came through playing college athletics myself. And I know, and I want as many kids as possible to have that same experience. There are over 500,000 student athletes in the United States. Okay, 60% of American CEOs have a college sports background. So this is an incredible leadership development tool that this country has. And, we built it on accident. We didn't mean to build it like this. We're the only country in the world that houses sports at this level in higher education, but they work so well together, in that, we get these kids at a time where we can educate their minds, but also, educate them in so many other ways and turn them into great leaders and very productive members of society. And so it's important that we maintain it. I mean, we have this great American treasure, and because of either, bad intentions, I hope that's not it, or just, lack of paying attention and, not being aware of the changing times, we're on the verge of losing it, and already have started to lose it. It started to erode. And so, that's the goal here. And the Sports Broadcasting Act is part of the formula. And, practically speaking, you can't implement media rights pooling, which is what we're really talking about when we're talking about the Sports Broadcasting Act. Sports Broadcasting Act is a big thing that affects a lot of different, aspects of sports media broadcasting. But what we're really talking about is pooling of media rights. Practically speaking, in college, that can't occur until all the existing contracts expire, which the ACC goes until 2036. So this is a long-term conversation. And I think we just need to look at all the different options that may exist. Another option that, people have talked about is we need to do a better job of monetizing the March Madness tournament. And most media experts say, we make a little over $1 billion a year off March Madness. It should be about twice that. The women's and Olympic sports, like, I don't know. I've been watching the softball playoff, all week. Like, people love watching softball, but softball loses a huge amount of money. It makes no sense. It's a marketable product. It just kind of gets thrown in these media contracts. And so, we don't find ways to monetize it. And that's just, no other business would run that way. Right? You have this great appealing asset that attracts eyeballs, and you do nothing to make money off of it. It doesn't make any sense. So there have been a lot of really good ideas that have come out of this that, we can pursue to make the system more sustainable. And the goal is not to take money away from anybody. It's not to take money from the Big Ten and the SEC or whoever. The idea is to make the pie bigger so that the smaller schools can survive. We're not trying to take away anybody's relative to the day and age or anything like that. All we're trying to do is just fully monetize the system, professionalize the revenue side of the equation, we've already professionalized the cost side because we're paying the players, we're paying the coaches, we're paying everybody, but the revenue side is still stuck in, like 1991.
Right.
And it just makes sense that we have to modernize it. Unfortunately, the only way to do that is through Congress acting and giving the schools antitrust exemptions to be able to go out and pursue these opportunities and work together to find the best solutions. And I'm not saying that Congress needs to mandate what those solutions are. In fact, the media rights pooling that's in the Cruz-Cantwell bill is just strictly voluntary. Nobody's going to be forced to do it. But it allows them the opportunity to explore what the possibilities might be over the next 10 or 12 years. And so that's what we are, that's what we're trying to accomplish.
I like what you said too about we're not just looking for more money, but we're also trying to run this more efficiently. I look at two things,
Yeah.
Cody. One, the dead money payouts to these coaches after they leave is a real problem.
Right.
And then two, I'm in Oregon. Oregon joined the Big Ten. Why are University of Oregon students traveling to the East and to the Midwest to play softball or tennis? I can understand it for football or basketball, but the non-revenue generating sports, why are we traveling all over the place for the secondary sports?
So that's been one of the most popular items discussed, is that we should re-regionalize the Olympic and women's sports. It's crazy that we don't. And again, not only does that save money, it's those West Coast schools are spending an extra $3 or $4 million a year on travel, so save that money, but also it makes people more interested in attending the games and watching the games.
Right.
If you're playing people that and you care,
Right.
So it's, and honestly, the same thing goes for football and men's basketball. People want to play their regional rivals. And so there is a section in the bill that talks about, preserving traditional rivalries. And those, that's a little bit hard for people to understand sometimes, but sports fans do care about playing the team that your guy that you office next to went to, and all that.
Sure.
Kind of, that those things are important and fun, and fans show up for them. And we've seen declining in-person attendance at games in certain areas, and it's all because of this. Just we've ripped apart these traditional rivalries and the games that people care about. Maryland is a great program, an awesome program, right? And I have a ton of respect for them. But when they go to play the University of Washington, what commonalities do those? They don't even know each other.
Right.
They have no history, no tradition. So why are they playing each other every year? I don't know. It's all been driven by this idea that they need to have that the conferences need to have a presence in each time zone from a media marketing standpoint. There are different ways to work that out. And I'm not saying that I'm trying to be prescriptive with respect to what the solutions are. And I'm not trying to bust up any conferences or any contracts or anything like that at all. But what I'd like to do is just set an environment where, without violating any trust law, we can all get in a room and talk about just common sense solutions. Like, this is not rocket science, right? Everybody kind of knows how it works. And so that's where we're trying to go. And I think that this bill is a great step, in that direction. So
what about the college commissioners? Because it seems like they have turf to protect. They want to maintain independence from anything like this and even the NCAA, and they want to keep their jobs and have their nice salaries. I see them as being kind of an obstacle to something like this that would be more uniform federally across all of college sports.
Yeah. So, I would ask you, sort of what, over what period of time has everything kind of collapsed in college sports? Would you say the last 10, 11 years, something like that?
Yeah. Look, I'm happy the players are getting paid now.
Yeah.
But yes, the model has changed drastically. And like we've discussed in this conversation, most athletic departments are running at a deficit. That's bad business.
Yeah. So that's all happened over about the last decade.
Right.
And you look at who's been in charge over the last decade, who's been running this thing, and it is those college commissioners. So while I think that they have a lot of experience, they're smart people, and I respect their position in that they are paid to advocate for their own interest and the interest of their conference. So they're going to have a certain perspective, but I don't understand the concept of completely leaning on and completely going with the ideas of the people who have presided over this period of time where college sports has collapsed and collapsed into a state of chaos. So there has to be outside voices. There have to be people who have a perspective that is not so much in the weeds and is kind of outside looking in. Also, people who have a business background. So through this college sports roundtable, we brought in media partners, we brought in university presidents, we brought in hundreds of student athletes, people who are in the sports business, professional sports owners, private equity folks, tried to get different perspectives on why things are working and why things are not. And I can tell you that a broad-based, sort of survey of all the different stakeholders and knowledgeable people has been very helpful in finding a solution that works. What has not worked is lobbying efforts that are focused on just doing exactly what the commissioners can do or want to do, because the fact of the matter is they're the ones that have, run this car in the ditch. And, again, all due respect to those guys, and, some of them I get along with great. Some of them can't stand me. I don't really care. I'm happy to have friendships, but if they don't like me, that's fine. But I cannot understand the logic of following them entirely with respect to what they want to do, because they are ultimately the ones that caused this problem.
A lot of people listening to this are saying, what about the NCAA? Aren't they the governing body of college athletics? Where do they fit into this puzzle? And from where I sit, Cody, and I have friends at the NCAA, so I'll be careful, but they've been largely absent from this conversation. And it seems like
I think that I like Charlie Baker. He's a nice man.
Mm-hmm.
But Charlie needs to come out and say something and and express his opinion. But again, he hasn't been at the NCAA that long, so he doesn't have full ownership of the problem. He's done what he can to fix it, but Charlie needs to step up and say some things because he sees what's going on. Now, they have made some very critical mistakes, especially in their mitigation strategy and their backwardness. They could have stopped all of this, 10 or 12 years ago if they had just kind of pulled their heads out of the sand and recognized that there were just blatant inequities. You talked about the coaches making these multi-million-dollar payouts and all this kind of stuff, while the athletes are essentially forced to take a vow of poverty in order to participate in college athletics. That's not fair. And, all it took was a couple of them going to court and saying, hey, look, this is obviously unfair, and the courts smacked them down. And so they now have very little ability to enforce any rules at all. And, they've been defanged. And so, they don't have a lot of control. So, if I were Charlie Baker, I would come out and say, hey, look, this bill's a step in the right direction, and let me come in and help be constructive and maybe, supply my input with respect to some things I think you could tweak or, make it even better. And we would welcome that conversation. Absolutely. And I don't think Charlie's necessarily a bad actor at all. And I don't think the NCAA is doing anything on purpose. I think they are a product of, they're a 100-plus-year-old institution that, just has a hard time changing and has become very bureaucratic and slow. And so, we need to try to help them to modernize and also empower them to some extent to do what they were designed to do.
So if we were going to modernize college sports and start this college sports commission that some have suggested, who needs to be on that college sports commission? I agree with you. There need to be business minds, people who have modern ways of thinking. Who needs to be on that to kind of guide college sports going forward?
Well, I think it's a mixture of those people. It's people who are capable and, and part of the bill actually outlines, how the individuals there's a committee for the future of college sports. It's in the bill. How those people would be nominated. But my hope is that they would be people who are business minded, that are sort of outside of the system to some extent right now, that can, can come in and provide fresh thinking and, new ideas, and not just be stuck on doing things this a certain way because that's how we've always done them.
Right.
Um, that's the mistake that we made up to this point.
Yeah. I'm interested in name, image, and likeness. You
Mhm.
have had such a bird's eye view to this in the last few years via your role at Texas Tech. How is that from where I sit? Like, again, I'm happy the players are getting paid. But what I don't like is when I see a quarterback who's playing at 4 different schools in 4 years. And,
Right.
it's kind of the hired gun mentality. How is name, image, and likeness going from where you sit? What would you tweak if you were in charge of all of this?
So, all right. So the things I don't like about it are just what you mentioned. The fans don't like it because they like to, have a team with some cohesion that,
Right.
they can cheer for and watch people develop and, become players and be one of them. I think the kids are losing out because they're, my best friends and the people that I stay in touch with on a regular basis, the guys that were my groomsmen in my wedding were all guys I played football with. Right. And those relationships are irreplaceable and they're not getting that anymore. Um, Thirdly, and I think that they're missing out on important life lessons. Like one of the things that you get out of football, or a couple of things out of football or any sport, is the ability to deal with adversity and learning how to compete, right? And the reality is that in the real world, there is no transfer portal, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
if things are hard, you can't just quit, that's the case in business. That's the case in your personal life. You have to deal with tough things, and we're not teaching them that. But I think maybe most importantly, the more often a kid transfers, the less likely he is to graduate. And for 99% of these student athletes who are not making the big bucks, we're very focused on the high paid NIL athletes because they get the headlines, but there are hundreds of thousands or more who are not making that kind of money. That education, that degree is the most valuable thing they're going to get out of their college athletic experience. And so if they transfer 3, 4 times, even twice, they're much less likely to graduate. And so what we've tried to do through the bill is place some guardrails around that. The way it's set up now is that they get one free transfer for any reason. They get another transfer if their coach leaves. They get another transfer if they graduate. That seems pretty reasonable to me. And then if you want to transfer again for whatever reason, it goes back to the old rules where you have to sit out for a season. Fair enough. I think that's very, very reasonable. And, and it's a double-edged sword. Like you want the kids to be able to go out and market themselves and make as much money as possible. And I completely agree with you. I think they should be paid, but at the same time, we don't want to hurt them while we're trying to help them.
Right.
And if we allow them to transfer too much, we are hurting them in many ways. We have to remember these are young people that, they're still growing up. And I've got a current recruit living in my house right now. And for him, I want him to ideally stay at the same place for the whole time, get his degree, maybe even get a master's degree while he's still playing and build that character, build that ability to deal with adversity, learn to compete, form a core group of friends and relationships and, a network that he can go out into the world with. That's what I want for him. And that's what I want for all of these athletes.
Yeah. And again, I commend you because I think women's sports and the Olympic sports, because they don't drive revenue, they might be the forgotten sports. And I don't want to see those go away. And that's why I wanted to have you on today.
No, that's the number one objective here is to save women's sports and save Olympic sports. And if you look back, even back to last summer when the president issued his first executive order on this matter, that is his main focus: women's sports and Olympic sports. He has a granddaughter that's a female golfer.
Yeah,
at the University of Miami. He gets it. He also understands that if we don't have the Olympic development pipeline through college athletics, which we're the only country in the world that does it like that, we have no Olympics. And so we have to make sure that these things are protected. And that really ultimately is the goal, because football will find a way because the money is there, right? The other sports don't have that luxury. And so, football is the focus and everybody, talks about football and it's the highest profile, but really those that stand to lose here are the athletes in the women's sports and Olympic sports.
What happens next? So we've got this Protect College Sports Act. It's been presented to the Senate. Walk us through what happens next, because you just said a few minutes ago, you can't really change certain things until all the media rights deals have expired, and 2036 is a long time from now. So what happens now with this act and what we can do to continue the Saving College Sports initiative?
So if you read the bill, and the first hearing on the bill is tomorrow in the Senate, I'm going to be there. But we can get control of eligibility. We can get control of transfers. We can limit the lawsuits. We can unify the state laws and make sure that there's one, set of rules all across the country. We can regulate agents, which is a problem we haven't talked about yet, but there are these agents running around taking advantage of these kids. We can do that. And then we can start in these near-term initiatives to control cost and to increase revenue before we get into the media rights pooling discussion. And again, that's going to be a long discussion. It's controversial, and the Big Ten and SEC are all worked up about it and lathered up about it. Relax, guys. Look, this is not something we're going to force on anybody. This is something we're like giving you a free option to look at it, like and study it, and take your time. And let's talk about it, and let's all come together and see if there's a way we can all make more money in the long run doing things that way, or doing things in a different way. And different sports are marketed in different ways. Baseball looks very different than the NFL does in terms of the way they market themselves. There are all different sorts of models that could be used to maximize revenue. Let's look at all of those, and let's study them, and let's talk about them, and let's figure out the best solution. And let's leave our agendas at the door, and let's come in and just do what makes sense for the institution and for the kids. That's all that we're trying to accomplish here.
Indiana head football coach Curt Cignetti recently came out and said there's urgency behind this. This needs to be addressed in the next 12 to 14 months. I tend to think he's a pretty smart guy. He's really close to all of this. So what is the urgency? Because again, there's the 10 years with the media rights, but then he's saying we need to figure this out in the next 12 to 14 months. What
that's right.
Figured out
and part of
12
part of it is we have to stop the litigation. We have to get control of rulemaking. Those things that need to happen immediately. We need to basically tourniquet the problem and stop bleeding. And then from there we can build. And, and that's the goal, but he's absolutely right. It's an urgent problem. And that's why you're starting to see urgent attention paid to it. That's why you're starting to see Senators Cantwell and Cruz, Schmidt, Coons all get together, and, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and really work hard to write this bill that is, in my opinion, extremely well written, very well thought out, comprehensive, the most thoughtful legislation we have seen on this topic, and we've seen a lot of different versions, and our best chance of actually getting it passed. Not only did they think about the policy side of it, but they also thought about the politics and trying to kind of walk the tightrope on some of these more fraught issues that, people are going to have problems with, and, try to kind of toe the line, because this has to be bipartisan. It has to pass with 60 votes, a filibuster proof majority in the Senate. And, and also we want something that everybody's happy with. Like I would love to see this thing passed with 70 or 80 votes in the Senate. And I think that's very possible. And so that's what we're working toward, is just something that everybody can agree on, because the one thing I know is that sports are a unifying force in this country. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, what your views are. Everybody loves sports, and it brings us all together. And there are not a lot of those institutions left in this country anymore where we can all, get together and have a good time. Right. And, I don't know. I think that maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm an idealist. Maybe I haven't spent enough time in Washington to appreciate how messed up it truly is. But I'm optimistic that, people can set their selfish interests aside, their ideologies, and, their past disputes, and their, and actually, find a way to make this thing work. And I think we will. And I think this bill is a great step forward.
Cody, before I let you go, is there anything that anyone listening to this can do to help with the Saving College Sports initiative? Whether you're a fan, a booster, a parent of a college athlete, is there anything that people could do to support this?
Yeah, I think use your voice. I mean, like we all have social media. Like, come out and say you support it. You can also, if you have connections, or even just call your elected representatives and tell them, hey, you want to see this done. I would talk to your universities and your university presidents and your athletic directors and say, hey, we'd really like to see this happen because we would like to keep sports at our university. What's going on, and how are you guys feeling about it? Use your voice, talk about it. Don't just sit back and wait for it to happen. And for me, I'm the type of person that if I see a problem, I really want to go fix a problem. And I would encourage others to do the same. Just get involved. And, if this is important to you, if you love college sports, if you see the importance and the value in college sports, then, use your voice and do something about it.
Cody, I commend you on your passion behind this. Thank you for joining me on Sports Business Radio, and best of luck with the Saving College Sports initiative that you're working on. And you've got a lot more patience than I do.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your having me.